This is Dave again at AFX Search, licensed investigators in Palm Beach, Florida. This is both for colleague investigators and also private citizens that are looking at doing surveillance and what things you need to take caution with when either doing surveillance yourself or even hiring an investigator to do surveillance. There's a lot of laws which govern how you can and cannot do surveillance, when you can do it, and what prevention you have to put into place to make sure you're not violating a law or statute. The first thing is many states have rules against enhancing video. Most people have an expectation of privacy in certain locations. For example, if you're inside your home, even if the curtains are open, you have an expectation of privacy in your actions. If somebody's walking by the sidewalk and they can see in your window, well, that's legitimate. But if somebody's 1,000 feet away with a spotting scope, that may not be legitimate surveillance, and if that's used, that may violate the law and have some other consequences we'll talk about in a minute. The other part of it is recording audio. Almost every state has some rules about whether it's a one-party or two-party state, whether you can record audio without a person being notified or agreeing to it. Well, that means is if you have a video camera and you're videoing somebody, which might be legitimate, if there's a microphone on that camera picking up audio, even if you're not using it or you delete it later, that technically could be a violation of law. Many investigators will defeat the microphone on their camera, even to the point of disassembling the video camera and cutting or taking apart that wire to the microphone. You don't want to break any laws that's going to make your evidence no good. There's stalking laws which come into play, especially if you're a private citizen and have a vested interest in that case or that party that you're surveilling. You might be running afoul of stalking laws. If you go onto private property to do surveillance, that might be an issue. Even if it's not the private property of the person that you're observing, if it's somebody else's property and you don't have permission, that could make that evidence no good and get you into trouble. And that can be determined. If you have pictures or video of a person that you're observing and those videos or pictures are used in court, a good defense attorney can say, hey, look, where was this video taken? They can triangulate that picture or video and prove that you're on private property. Number one, get that evidence thrown out. Number two, diminish the credibility of either the person who is bringing the case or even the investigator. If that investigator broke the law by going on private property, the rest of their testimony might be thrown out. So if you're a client looking at an investigator, you want to make sure that that you're not that you are making sure the investigator uses the best practice on doing their surveillance. There's also the question of GPS. Can you use GPS to follow somebody or track somebody? In most states, there's very specific laws on that. If you have a vested interest in a vehicle that person's using, whether it's a spouse or family member, you may have some ability to use GPS. However, some states have even gone so far to say is even if it's your car and you own it, if that person doesn't know about it or there's some separation, if you're a separated couple and your estranged spouse is using a vehicle, even if it belongs to you, you don't want to have GPS on it. So make sure that you as a private citizen or your investigator knows the laws and is not breaking them because that could put you into trouble. In some cases, it could be harassment. If you keep following the person, keep showing up, whether you're an investigator or not, the surveilled party could say, look, I'm being followed all the time. This is harassment. This is not somebody covertly trying to observe my whereabouts or my activities. It's somebody who's in my face. I know they're surveilling me. They're doing it to harass me or to give me some pressure or stress to settle a case. All of these things can make it difficult to use this information in court. If you have observation of somebody doing something wrong or doing something which could help your case, whether it's a divorce case or a fraud case, but it was done illegally or improperly, that evidence can get thrown out, the testimony can get thrown out, the person who provided the evidence can be discredited in court, and worst case scenario, you could have liability as a plaintiff even if you hired an investigator to do this. So make sure that the surveillance techniques are correct and legal. The last thing is if you're doing surveillance yourself, you have to be careful because you have to follow all traffic laws. You may also be subject to, if somebody sees you following somebody around or parked in a cul-de-sac observing a house, the law enforcement might be called in and said, look, there's somebody suspicious in my neighborhood. This environment we have of, if you see something, tell about it, that DHS puts out there. You're parked in a cul-de-sac, all suspicious and spooky with binoculars, it's likely that neighbors will call. If you're a licensed investigator, you may call up law enforcement, let them know you're in the area, and you have your investigator's license to verify that. The other thing is, what if you observe a crime? If you're an investigator or a private citizen doing surveillance and you observe a crime either by that subject or somebody else, what are you going to do? You have to know the procedure. So surveillance is a very common activity for investigators. Whether you're a client or an investigator, it's really important to know the laws and make sure you're following them closely so that the results become a positive thing for your case or your question, not a negative thing that could either hurt your case or, worst case scenario, get you into some other kind of trouble.